Okay, so I previously posted a tutorial for a 2D game that showed how to give a playable character an ability like telekinesis, where you would click on an object and the object would fly towards the player spinning. It would stop in front of them, and then we click on the object again, it would go flying, and it could be used as a projectile weapon. And someone asked if I could show that for a 3D environment. And because it's a 3D environment, it adds some complexities, but it is doable, and that's what this series is going to be about. Because of some of the complexities of a 3D environment, we're going to do this in an iterative process. In other words, it'll work under certain conditions, and then we'll make it work under all conditions. So let's get started. So first, let's create our environment. So game object, 3D object, cube. Now let's move that cube to the center. So 0, 0, 0. We'll scale it out, so let's make it say 15 by 1 by 15, and then we'll just move this down a bit. Move it down to like -1. Now what we're going to do is we're going to copy this, I'm going to paste this, and then we're just going to rotate this 90 degrees. So basically we're just creating like a little mini room. So we have a floor and we have a back wall. Cubes by default have a box collider, so this is what makes them solid. So objects can rest on it, objects can collide with it. Now down here is the only external asset. I downloaded it from the asset store. It's just the barrel. So we'll put this into the scene. And by luck, it's in just about the right place. Now, in addition to a collider, this one uses a mesh collider. We're going to also add physics, rigid body, and we're going to shut off gravity. So, the rigid body allows for physics, basically it allows for gravity, it allows for velocity, and things like that. The application of force, whereas the collider box just allows, or the colliders in general, not just box colliders, but the colliders in general allow for collisions, so that makes them solid. So two different components that do two different things that, though, tend to work together. So we don't want a rigid body on the back wall or the floor because they're not going to be moving. They need to be immovable. So now what we need to do is we need to be able to click on this barrel and have it launch towards since it's going to be a first-person game, it's going to launch towards the camera but stop in front of the camera. So the easiest way to do that is just to put an object here, so when the barrel collides with it, it stops at that object. The object would just be invisible though. Now as far as the clicking on the barrel, that's a little bit harder, and we'll get to that in a minute. So let's create our stopper, our buffer object. So we're going to create an empty object, and we'll call this buffer. And we're going to move this also 0, 0, 0. I'm going to move this towards the camera. The camera on the z-axis is -10. So let's put the buffer at like -7 and see how that works. Now we're going to give the buffer physics. It also gets a box collider. Now, the purpose of the box collider is again to detect the collision with the barrel. So let's start with that. Let's start with the barrel just automatically, without even you clicking on it, we're going to have the barrel just suddenly fly towards the screen and have it stop, just so you can see that functionality working. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click, create C#, and we'll call this move con for move control. So we're going to click on the wooden barrel. We're going to put move con on it, and then we'll double click to open it up. Zoom in a bit. Now what we're going to do is in the start section, and again, this is an iterative process, we're going to have the barrel automatically launch just so you can see that functionality before we start adding conditions to it. So, get component. Which component? The rigid body. Okay, what aspect of the rigid body? The velocity. I'm going to set a new velocity. Now, since the barrel is lined up directly with the camera, we can do this really easily. When you start rotating your character around is where you're going to have to make more adjustments. But again, it's an iterative process. We're going to do this one step at a time. So we don't need to move it on the x-axis or the y-axis. We just need it to move on the z-axis. Now, in addition to that, we want to do something else with the rigid body. We want it to make the object spin. So that would be angular velocity equals new vector 3. And again, the x, y, and z axis, let's have it rotate on the x-axis. So one handles movement throughout the world. This really just handles rotation. So let's go ahead and save that. Now, when it hits the buffer, we want it to stop, but we only want it to stop this. So, a couple things. First, the buffer. The collider box needs to be a trigger because we don't want it to be solid. We don't want things bumping into this. This is just to be an area for objects to be caught in. So what we're going to do is outside of start, outside of update, void on trigger enter because we just set the collider box on the buffer to be a trigger. Collider other. Now this is important. This is a predefined routine and it is case sensitive, so O, T, and E must be capitalized. If you don't capitalize one of them or you capitalize one of the other ones that are lowercase, it won't work. Has to be exactly like that. So this is looking for, this script is attached to the barrel, okay? It is looking for a collision with a trigger object, which is going to be the buffer, so we just have to check for that. So if other dot name equals buffer, then we want something to happen. We want this to stop. We want there to be no more motion. And that should do it, at least for this first step. So for this first step, as soon as the program starts, the barrel will start moving and rotating along the z-axis, and when it collides with the buffer object, it will stop moving but not stop rotating. So I bet this is probably a little bit too high, so let's move this down. And now let's run this. There we go. So, a couple things. The buffer probably isn't close enough to the camera. So let's move this a little bit closer to the camera. We'll move it to, say, negative 7.6. There we go. And it's really just your preference. You could actually maybe make the barrel bigger. Maybe proportionately it's too small. But there you go. So you now have this hovering in space in front of the player. It's probably hovering a little too slow, but again, that's preference. So now what we want to do is we don't want that to automatically happen. So we're going to shut this off. We're going to remark it out just by using 2 forward slashes. We don't really want to delete it just in case we ever need it again. You can, but as you're developing, you may find, oh, gee, I really want that code and not have to type it again. So now what we want to do is now we want to be able to click on this. Now here's the problem. In a 3D environment, when you have objects overlapping, mouse clicks really stop working. You can't just click on it like you can in a 2D environment. So what you would have to do is you really kind of have to fake it. You're going to click, and what we're going to do is we're going to shoot out an invisible object that then collides. So let's create that invisible object. So game object, create empty. This will be called Teleshot because it's your telekinesis. This will also get a collider. Let's use an orb this time though. So a sphere collider. Now let's move this object. So you can see, there you go, you can see the green circle. So what's going to happen is we're going to turn this into a prefab, and then whenever you hit a certain button, what's going to happen is the buffer object will shoot this orb out. So let's make this a little bit smaller. It's a little bit too big. So now we take Teleshot, drag it, drop down here. Now it's a prefab. Delete it from the scene. Now we're getting really close. So now we want the buffer to be able to shoot. So right click, create, C#, and we'll call this ShotCon, shot control. We'll click on the buffer object. We'll put the ShotCon script on it. We will open up that script. And in that script, what we're going to do is we're going to look for a key press. So we're going to look for a key press, and then we're going to instantiate an object. So public transform, and we'll call this teleobj, the telekinesis object. Save that. Before we go any further, let's just go back to see what that does. So here's the buffer object. The script is attached. Here's that new variable. Take the Teleshot and put it there. For want of a better way of explaining this, you've just now made the buffer object aware of the Teleshot object. Because even if they're in the same scene, objects really aren't aware of each other. You have to create linkages of various kinds. So by creating a transform variable and by using the prefab, the buffer object is now aware of this. It can do things, such as what we're about to do. So in the update section, again of the ShotCon script, if input, so we're looking for player input, and you can use whatever you want. I'm just going to use the space key. You can use fire 1 for the left mouse button, whatever. So get key down, because we don't want this to be rapid fire. And I believe it's just the word space if you're going to use the space button. And what do we want to do? We want to instantiate this object. So tell object. Where do we want to instantiate it? Well, we want to really instantiate it at the buffer. So transform dot position. So again, transform dot position. This is the position of the object the script is attached to. So the script is not attached to the tell object, it's attached to the buffer. So instantiate the tell object at the buffer's position, but use tell object's rotation. So those are the 3 arguments you have to include with instantiate. What is being instantiated, where it's been instantiated, and its rotation. All right, really close now. So this makes the buffer object aware of the shot object. This checks for a space key and instantiates the object. The problem is there's no motion. Okay, so it's going to instantiate it and then just sit there. So we need one more script to control the teleshot. So create C#, and we'll call this Telecon, short for telekinesis control. So even though this is a prefab, you can still make changes to it. So put the telecon script on it, and we're going to open it up. Now, when you instantiate an object, it's not just this name. Okay, so when we spawn the teleshot object, its name is going to change. It's going to be teleshot clone. So the first thing we're going to do is rename it. We're going to get rid of that clone. So telecon is attached to the shot object. So when it gets instantiated, just gameObject.name equals, and we're just going to return it to its original name, teleshot. That way, when we're checking for collisions, we don't have to say teleshot clone, we can just say teleshot. Okay, so this renames it, and in the start section, we also want to give it motion. So get component, rigid body, and I have to double check to make sure I gave it a rigid body, dot velocity equals new vector 3, 0, 0. We're going to have this move at 6. We want it to move pretty quick because the player doesn't realize they're shooting out an invisible object, so we want this to happen fairly fast. All right, so this is attached to the teleshot. So I did not give the teleshot a rigid body. Gave it the collider, and we're also going to set it to a trigger, and physics, rigid body, and get rid of gravity. So this is attached to that prefab. The name is set back to teleshot at the start, or in this case when it gets instantiated. The rigid body is given motion along the z-axis, so it shoots at the barrel. So the last thing that we really need to do is now have the barrel react when it hits the shot object. So we already have a script for that. We already have MoveCon, and we already have a section checking for collisions. We just have to check the name. So if other.name, this time we're checking to see if it's colliding with, and make sure I get the name right, teleshot. So this is what I was talking about why we wanted to rename the teleshot. That way it doesn't have the word clone, and it makes typing this out a lot easier. So if the name of the object it's colliding with is teleshot, and again, this gets back to what I was saying about saving code and not deleting it, we already have what we need. So this is attached to the barrel. When the barrel has a collision with a trigger object, if that trigger object is named teleshot, then apply this. We know this already works. And we also want it to start rotating. And I think that's going to be about it for this tutorial as long as this works. Now, troubleshooting this is a little bit iffy, and that is because the teleshot is invisible. Because there's no, it shouldn't say invisible, there's no object to be visible. So to troubleshoot this, you might want to put some kind of graphic there so you can make sure that it's working. And there we go. So a little bit of a lag there. Because it's telekinesis, you kind of want it to be more instant, but that gets us started. That allowed us to hit the space button. Like I said, you could change that with Fire 1. And what you'd also do is you also kind of want to put like an X here or something to indicate what the center of the screen is. so you know what you're targeting. So a bunch of things going on that it really isn't looking at what you're clicking on yet. That is going to come in the next part. And also this is slowing down, so we would want this to be constant. Okay, very good for a start. So now you've seen how you can grab an object, pull it towards you, and then the next lesson we're going to deal with shooting the object back out, as well as dealing with more precise mechanics. All right, so that should do it for this one.